Good evening and welcome to another edition of Faith and Finance. I'm Orville Thomas, joined as always with Dwayne Anderson. Dwayne, how are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm doing great.
Good. It's good to see you again. We have a great show in store for each and every one of you this evening. We're on our 10th series of our Faith and Finance journey, 10 of 12. This evening's lesson will be on saving and investing. We have a specialist in the house this evening that we'll be introducing it very shortly. But we did want to recap just a little bit about what the lesson talks about. Then we'll be taking each and every one of your questions live on air, and you'll be able to ask those questions to our professional right here in the studio. Saving and investing, our text for this week is Matthew 6:19 through 21. It simply says, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So we're going to talk about your treasure today. We've talked about saving in the past, but we're going to delve in a lot deeper on the topic of investing. I know a lot of you have been waiting weeks for this topic, so we trust we will not disappoint this evening. One of the facts about saving is it is essential to sound money management. If you fail to save, your budget will simply fail. Without savings, you are doomed to the use of credit. And as we know, we want to try to stay away from credit. Credit simply says that you are expecting the norm to continue inevitable, meaning that you always expect to have a job. You always expect to be in a good situation to pay for the items that you put on credit. You do have to change your attitude, however. Put savings as far as your food, your transportation, your housing, or any other item in your budget. Those are items that you want to make sure you're putting aside for that rainy day. Obviously, when security is the object, most people feel that they never have enough. Hoarding is the opposite of saving. Hoarding transfers our trust away from God to our money. That's when you just can never get enough. But you have to learn to trust God in what you do have and also put a plan in place to know how much should I save? What am I saving for? And then you can have a finish line in place. A guaranteed investment. What is a guaranteed investment, Dwayne? What is a guaranteed investment?
Well, paying down debt is definitely a huge thing. Paying off credit cards and moving towards debt-free living. Mm-hmm. If you're paying 20% interest on your credit cards, when you're paying them down, you're gaining 20% guaranteed. So that's the biggest and first step you should take to getting money back in your pocket.
Definitely. Good point. Because again, that investment is guaranteed. Nothing else is guaranteed in life. But if you're paying a 20% interest on a card and you pay that off, then you've just gained 20% of an investment, if you will, in yourself. That's very important. So how much is enough? How much do I need to save? Most financial professionals will suggest having 3 to 6 months of living expenses. Some have even suggested 6 to 9, especially during something like a pandemic in which we're going through right now, because it is taking a little bit longer to find a new job after a layoff has occurred. There is a caution that we want to make sure: the fear of not having enough money to last during one's lifetime. It does prevent that person from participating in excellent giving or returning opportunities during that person's lifetime. The danger is to hoard and place faith in bank accounts rather than in God. Again, if you're in debt, if you're under the tyranny of debt, that's why most individuals, not only faith-based individuals, are not able to give like they want to give. So it's not just that churches have 25% of their membership that support the church. It's that the population in general, only 25% of the people give. And that reason is not because we're church folk, but it's because church folk, in addition to regular everyday folk, are not in a situation in life where they can give because they're hurdled by debt.
Yeah, if you're in a situation where you're living paycheck to paycheck, which unfortunately is a large segment of society, then that's right. Why we do this series, to help you gain financial principles so that you can be in a better situation. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, it is harder to give. It is harder to meet and reach your goals.
And that's why we encourage you to be out of debt. And you'll hear that theme a little bit more this evening as well. Ron Blue, in his book, Splitting Heirs, it says, decide the limit of your lifestyle. It is important to do this in advance because as your income and wealth increase, we seem to find endless ways to spend or invest or save that money. And that pushes the finish line further away, meaning it pushes where you want to get to further away because you don't have a goal set. So what are some of the heavenly investments as we as faith-based individuals talk about? How does a person store up treasure in heaven? You hear that term all the time, or you hear that saying all the time. In Matthew 19 and Mark 10 and Luke 18, all say that if the young man had helped the poor, he would have stored up treasure in heaven. That's how you store up treasure in heaven. So when you give to your church, especially if you give to Patmos, we're helping individuals that have fallen on hard times every week. Most times, situations that you don't hear of. So when you return a faithful offering to the church, you are in essence storing up treasure in heaven, because we are a sound ground, if you will. You sow good seeds when you sow into Patmos. Every opportunity to help a brother in need or to aid the cause of God in the spread of the truth is a pearl that you can send beforehand and deposit in the bank of heaven for safekeeping. That's Testimonies for the Church, Volume 3, page 249. So there are some investment choices. We'll give a brief synopsis. This is from the lesson. Some investment choices. 3 basic investment choices. 1 is storing up treasures in heaven. We just talked about what that is. Number 2 is earthly investments, where you become the owner. Examples of that are stocks, mutual funds, real estate, precious metals, farmland, etc. Number 3, some basic investment choices are the earthly investments where you become now the lender. Examples of that are savings accounts at banks, credit unions, CDs, corporate bonds, government bonds, state and local bonds, and annuities. There are also 4 levels of investing. This is, again, just an intro to our professional on staff. In the book, Sound Mind Investing by Austin Power, he gives 4 levels of financial fitness in his book. These levels suggest a progression of investing techniques and sophistication. Level 1, however, is to become debt-free. We've been harping on that for the past 9 weeks. The only proper foundation for investing. You stay away from credit, do not build any new credit, and then you want to pay off your house. And again, for those of you that are new, in our final lesson on week 12, that'll be on October 17th, we'll tell you how to get out of debt in 7 years or less, including the mortgage. Prior states, keep the truth in mind. No investment is as secure as a repaid debt. Putting your desire to invest ahead of repaying your debt obligations is usually a sign of immaturity, not financial sophistication.
And I know that's come up a couple of times in our conversations that we've had here. People are looking to invest, and we're going to be talking a lot more about investing later on, and that's a crucial part of this process. But if you owe 20% in debt and 20% interest in debt, unless your investments are clearing that number, you're still in debt. You're still in a bad situation financially. So it's important, and we're going to, like Orville has said, we're going to keep hammering that point home, is getting that debt taken care of. Then you can really attack the investing piece of it, so that way you can get a great return on your investment.
That's correct. Level 2, saving for future needs. You want to develop an emergency fund. We talked about that as well. Emergency savings fund. You want to start off with at least $1,000. The majority of the population does not have $1,000 to attack any emergency that comes up in life. Develop an accumulation fund for expected future purchases and expenditures, such as taxes. If you're paying on your home and you pay your taxes at the end of the year each year, you want to put that money aside. Then also develop a plan for your children's education, so your children do not get burdened by student loans like you or I may have done as well. Do not set your children up for failure as well. Level 3, investing your surplus. So once all your debts are paid, learn about the various types of investments. And you here tonight are going to learn about those here this evening. Spend time learning about mutual funds. So continue to tune in here and listen to our expert here in the next 5 minutes or so, and all that he will educate you on about mutual funds and investments as well. Understand the value of tax deferment and tax consequences of your financial decisions. These are very important. Finally, level 4, diversity for safety. Know what you want to accomplish with your investment portfolio. Set goals. That's always key. Set a goal, just like building a budget. If you don't have a goal set on when you want to go on that vacation, or when you want to put your kids in college, or when you need to purchase a new car, nothing is going to be accomplished, because you're just walking through life with no set goal. Determine how much is enough and spread out the risk. The Bible simply says, the Bible encourages diversification. Ecclesiastes 11, verse 1 and 2 simply says, cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a serving to 7 and also to 8, for you do not know what evil will be on the earth. That's Ecclesiastes 11, 1 and 2. That's very important. Very important to be able to diversify that which you have. 401ks, good stock mutual funds are very good to have for diversity. We just want to touch real quickly on get-rich-quick schemes. Any individual that is struggling with debt and wanting to get out of debt quickly will always be under the lure of a get-rich-quick scheme. Proverbs 21:5 says, "The plans of the diligent lead sure to plenty, but those of everyone who is hasty surely to poverty." Most of what you hear about tonight, this is not a get-quick-rich scheme. It's not even a get-rich-quick process. It takes time for investments to actually show their fruition. So there are investment strategies. We'll talk about those as we look to transition to our special guest this evening. And again, you can start texting some of those questions that you already know you have, even before you hear his presentation. There's some investment questions some of you have wanted to ask for many weeks now. You can start texting those in so you can have those in the queue, and you'll be one of the first to get those questions answered. Some of those 12 basic points are: one, accept Christ as both Savior and Lord. Again, because anything we talk about over the last 9 weeks is faith-based. So understand that Christ is the owner of everything. Number two, you want to pray for divine wisdom and help from the Holy Spirit. Number three, study Bible principles of money management. That's what we've been talking about for the last 9 weeks as well. Number four, work with integrity and excellence, meaning the work that you do every day. Work with integrity and excellence. If you're at work, then work. Don't just show up to work and then end up losing your job and then pray to God and say, Lord, give me another job. But what are you doing with the job that you do have right now? Number five, develop a heavenly mentality. Number six, give tithes and offerings. You can't ask God to bless your giving. You can't ask God to bless your financial situation if you're not returning to God that which he has given to you. Number seven, include savings as a regular part of your spending plan. Number eight, become completely debt-free. Number nine, learn what you can about money management. Number 10, prepare and follow an investment plan. You'll learn about that tonight. Number 11, develop a retirement plan. We spoke briefly about that on last week. Number 12, prepare your estate distribution documents. We're going to talk about that on next week with our estate planning expert as well. 1 Timothy 6:6-7. Now, godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain that we can carry nothing out. So at the end of the day, no man might buy or sell, Revelation 13:17, save that he had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Also in Testimonies for the Church, volume 3, page 249, the time is coming when we cannot sell at any price. The decree will soon go forth prohibiting men to buy or sell of any man save him that hath the mark of the beast. Evangelism, page 63. The very means that is now so sparingly invested in the cause of God and that is selfishly retained will in a little while be cast with all idols to the moles and to the bats. Money will soon depreciate in value very suddenly when the reality of eternal scenes opens to the senses of man. The parable of the talents shows us that we are each entrusted by God with different financial assets, gifts, and opportunities, and we will be held accountable to him for how we invested them in this life. So what you learned this evening, we hope that you not only listen, but also apply it to your life as well. That's key. Knowledge without application is nothing at the end of the day. Dwayne, what do we have coming up next? What's our special guest? Tell us a little bit about the individual that's going to be educating us this evening.
Sure. So today, I'm proud to say that I have one of my good friends and business partners, David Santillo, who has a wealth of knowledge. I'll let him describe a little bit about himself, but he's been helping people invest and save for many years now. He's well versed in the knowledge of investments and has rightfully helped others, along with myself and my family, get into a situation where we can be better prepared for the future. So without any further ado, I'd like to bring David here. David, how are you today? Yeah, and I know we've been doing this for a long time, and a lot of these things will kind of blend into what we've talked about. But I'm not going to take too much more of your time. I want you to get right in and talk to the people out there and kind of let them know some of the principles, the basics of investing, and I'm sure they're going to learn a lot.
Awesome, great. Well, I appreciate just the opportunity to come and talk and educate, and just to be a part of just really moving the needle of getting folks from where they are to I mean, one of the most important things that we can do is to really take care of our finances, and to be able to go through that process and help you all with that is something that I'm extremely excited about, to be able to come in here and do that. So let's just start. My name is David Santillo. I am Sorry about that. I guess didn't have a mic working there. Apologies. My name is David Santillo. I'm a regional vice president here with a local Primerica office. I am a registered representative of PFS Investments, and I have to start there just to let you know that I do have that interest in this process as well. But what I want to get into first, as we start talking about just the different pieces of this puzzle, are mindsets that you should have when it comes to your investing. I think this is critical because so much of what we do when it comes to our finances really deals with our thinking and how we actually approach our money. And so let's just get into some of those mindsets. It's funny, I've heard this saying so many times, which is pay yourself first. And it's funny, as a believer, I actually added this next little piece that says, or is it second? Because as a believer, one of the rules that I like to live by is the 10-10-80 rule. And really the foundational piece of how do you start to build a portion of your money for savings. That first 10 represents 10%. And as a believer, what I like to try to educate fellow believers on, and even those in the secular world when I'm across the kitchen table from them, is that the first 10% should go to the Lord, right? He's the one who's blessed us with the opportunity to earn a living, and the living itself and the income that comes from that. So I try to help set families up on that set so that they're setting aside that first 10% to the Lord himself. That second 10%, that's the portion that you should pay yourself first. So that's why I say there, pay yourself first, or is it second? That second 10% is where you should start to build that saving strategy for yourself and your family. That last 80 represents 80%, which is what you should build a budget around living on as you're moving through for your finances. Really determining the mindset of needs versus wants, right? The PlayStation 5 is getting ready to come out, and I hear this on just about every appointment, like, oh, there's so many things that we need. And I'm like, do you really need the PlayStation 5 or do you want the PlayStation 5? Right. And so I always encourage folks to really understand the definitions between needs and wants and where that may fall into what it is they're considering purchasing. Understand that money is a tool, nothing more. Right? Money is meant to help us move the needle on certain things that we need to be able to do. And so far too often, we do get caught in chasing money and really trying to make money bigger than it should be. And when it becomes more than a tool, it starts to take over our lives, which then in turn does actually dishonor the Lord when we put something in front of what he's trying to give us. This is a critical one. It's not what you make, but it's what you save, right? There's a saying that if you make $10 and you spend $9, there's happiness. But if you make $9 and spend 10, there's misery, right? You've got to be able to live within your means, because that's where that debt starts to pile up. That's when those credit cards start to grow and balance. That's when you start to have to live on loans and those different things to make ends meet. And so that's a critical mindset that we need to address. Set financial goals, right? You heard that as one of the steps when we opened. You have to be able to establish those goals so that you know exactly what it is you're trying to hit, because you cannot hit a target that you haven't set your sight on, right? And so that's an important piece of this. Don't chase money. The last thing from a mindset, so many people try to go about this alone. That's why I'm so encouraged about this opportunity, because it's clear that here at Patmos, you guys have a program and a ministry that cares enough to come alongside of you and educate you. You should always, always have a plan. Right? Having a plan is critical when it comes to getting out of debt. Having a plan is critical when it comes to saving money. Having a plan is critical with how to spend that money once you have it saved. You've got to have a person who can be in your ear to really help you along the way as you're going along those processes. Because look, the reality is, he said when we started that it's not something that, just saving for retirement isn't something that happens overnight. It's not get rich quick. And so you're going to have fears and doubts and louder voices in your head. And if you don't have somebody that you can pick up the phone and call and say, this opportunity presented itself, how would this affect me financially? Being able to bounce those ideas off of somebody who can help you do that is such a critical part in the long-term success of what you're trying to do with your finances. Some myths about money that I want to address that I hope to dispel tonight when we get through all of our presentation here is, number one, if I can only save a little, it isn't worth it, or I don't have enough money to invest. I hear this more than anything else when I'm out in the field and sitting across the kitchen table from families on a nightly basis, is they have this belief that if I can only save $25, or if I can only save $50, or whatever that number is, that they shouldn't start. And that couldn't be further from the truth. that the stock market is too risky for investing. Now, on the surface, this is something that really, when we open up and kind of dig into this, it's not so much that the stock market itself is too risky, it's that the investments that you may be participating in have different risk levels. And so it's really about understanding what that looks like for you based on what it is your goals are. And so, for example, in this conversation, if your goal is for long-term retirement savings, then you've got a longer time frame. But if your goal is for emergency savings or short-term savings, you've got a much shorter time frame. And so the investments that you pick need to match those time frames. And so it's not so much that the market is risky, it's that understanding the risk of the market. And we're going to get into that a little bit later as well. Here's a big one. If there's anybody on the video right now watching live stream and we're talking about I'm too young to worry about saving money, if that is your mindset, then I couldn't implore you enough to please get rid of that thought, because it is never too early to start saving. And I'm going to show you some slides later that are going to illustrate those points. There's no way of knowing what I'll need in retirement. Another lie that people tell themselves. You have to be able to identify living expenses, living on percentages, and being able to know what it is you're going to do. And that just comes with just building a plan through that process. Here's a big one. Banks are our friends. Most people are just taught, hey, let's take our money to the bank. Let's just sit it there and it'll be protected and it's safe. And while all of those things are true for the most part, far too many people are relying all of their savings and resources on that process. And we're going to teach some things about that as well that teach you maybe you should be looking in other areas to take advantage of when it comes to your savings. Here's a big one I heard him speak of earlier. I should carry a balance on my credit card and be building credit, right? This whole credit trap is such a it's such a trap. That's the best word for it. So many people are out there trying to get you into those 18 and 19 and 20 and 25. I've seen as high as 29% credit cards, right? And so you don't need to have those credit cards in place to have good credit and to be able to have success when it comes to your money. Money and wealth are evil. That's one that I battle an awful lot. Good stock market means to buy. Bad stock market means to sell. Again, these philosophies that people have are myths about money, because that, again, couldn't be further from the truth. And we're going to get into some slides to dispel those things. So as we're going to dig in today, we've got a lot to cover. We don't have a ton of time, but I do want to say specifically before we get into the specifics of investing that it's very difficult for me to know every single person's situation. And investing, when it comes to planning, it's a really critical thing that is extremely personal, and it can change from person to person and situation to situation. So as we're talking through some concepts tonight, please understand that these are just concepts, and it may or may not be the right thing for you. It is in your best interest to make sure that you have somebody that you can kind of call, make sure they understand your situation specifically, just to make sure that before you apply some of the concepts that you learned tonight, you should just make sure that you vet them thoroughly with your current situation. So let's get into the part of what we're talking about tonight. And here is why what we're doing tonight is so critical. Out of 100 people who are working from age 25 to 65, here is what we've learned statistically. 54% are going to be dependent either on still needing to have family help them with finances or some type of financial program to help them make their bills. As we go through this process, we realize that 36% out of 100 people are still going to be working when they get to retirement. That means they just traded one career for the next, right? 5, unfortunately, will no longer be with us. 4 are going to build some security, meaning they were able to save between $250,000 and $1 million. And only one out of 100 will have built a strategy that has allowed them to have $1 million or more saved by the time they get to retirement. Now, this slide right here is the slide that makes me wake up every single day to be able to make a difference, because 100 people that we know, only one of us is going to end up in what we call the wealthy category or being financially secure. And that should really scare us and wake us up into taking action as we come through this process. So why is it then that 95% of people fail when it comes to their finances? The reality is they have no financial education, which is something that we hope to help you through that process here tonight, is learn some things. Number 2 is they have no game plan. You've heard it said here and on other shows, you've got to be able to identify a game plan to execute and move forward. It's funny, sometimes people go on road trips and they're like, well, you go onto to Google and you put in the directions so that you can figure out, how do I get from Orlando to, let's say, New York? If you've never been, you've got to build a game plan or a roadmap, if you will, to be able to do that. And building financial security is no different. You've got to be able to say, here's where I stand today, where am I going tomorrow, and how do I drive there, right? And so nobody out there has a financial game plan. They're just guessing at best. Number three, they have no financial coach. They have nobody in their corner that they can call when these financial things come up in your life. So, I mean, if you think about it, just out there as you're watching this, how many of you in the last 5 years had a major life event that impacted your finances? Maybe, unfortunately, it was a death. Maybe it was the joy of a wedding. Maybe it was the joy of another child in your family. Any number of things. Maybe it was a job loss. All of those things change your financial life, and you should have somebody that you can pick up the phone and call to discuss what that should look like as you move forward. Right? So when we go through, one of the things that I help families understand is how to take control of their finances. You've heard this number or this phrase a lot: debt. Most families are living in this debt cycle where your finances are controlling you. And before anybody starts to ask, hey, you guys said we're talking about investing, we are going to get there. But one of the biggest things keeping people from investing is the fact that they have no money to invest. So we have to be able to attack that evil 4-letter word that we call debt. Your finances having, all that control over you when you outspend your income, right? This is where we talked about that saying from before, when you're borrowing to maintain your lifestyle, when you're paying off one debt and accruing another debt. This is one of the biggest things people do. They pay off a car and they're like, hey, I have an extra $350 now that I can go buy furniture with instead, or now I can roll this $350 into another purchase or another debt, instead of actually turning that back around and turning that into what we call a cash cycle. And hopefully what I want to be able to do is give you hope tonight and help you understand how to put the pieces and parts in place to be able to get in control of your finances, how to become debt-free, how to be paying with cash instead of borrowing money when you're trying to make the next steps in your financial life, how to get to a place where you're investing and saving and having assets that you can build for your family. So one thing you're going to do, we've talked about this, you're going to pay yourself first. One thing you're going to have to also address, number two, possibly adjusting your priorities. There may be some things in your life, and I hate to have to be the person to tell you this, but there may be some things that you're going to have to decide that this no longer serves the purpose that it was serving in your life. If you want to take control of your finances, some things may have to exit stage left, right? Changing your thinking, some of those thoughts that we had talked about when I opened, just about the myths about money and maybe what you're thinking about how you should save and where. Adjusting your lifestyle, potentially earning additional income. I heard a great episode, I think it was last week's episode, where they were talking about the ability to go earn money outside of your current 40-hour-a-week job or whatever that may be. That couldn't be more important or more available in today's economy. There's all types of opportunities out there to earn additional income. You just have to be willing to go do that work. Avoiding the credit trap, and again, setting goals and having that plan. It's important to understand that there are things you're not going to be able to control when it comes to your retirement and finances. They're listed right there on the screen for you. You can't control Social Security. You're not going to be able to control what your employer offers or doesn't offer. You're not going to be able to control what the government does when it comes to taxation or taxes or inflation or the rising costs of goods. You're not going to be able to understand or control the risks of just one single investment, right? Or we'll talk to earlier about just the ability to diversify and have multiple streams and multiple avenues from an investing standpoint. So what you can control is how you save for your retirement. What you can control are where you generate other sources of income, the ways that you reduce your taxes, maximizing your savings, saving more money, making sure that that's a piece of your game plan, and diversifying your investments in the things that you have out there. So that way you're not just in one place or another when it comes to your savings. The reality is you can get out of debt, and you need to believe that so that you can step into that. You need to understand that you can build savings and that you can get on the path to financial independence, but it's always going to start with a decision that you have to make. And so I hope tonight that one of those things we're going to do is really help encourage you to be able to do those things. And so it's funny because I know you guys are like, investments, let's get there, let's go. That's what you're here for. And here I am talking about debt. And I couldn't, I promise I won't stay here for long, but quite literally, I sit on maybe 10 or 15 appointments a week. And the number one thing, I've said this earlier, that keeps families from saving money is the fact of that they carry too much debt. Dwayne in a previous episode talked about this compounding interest and when it comes to your debt and how that happens. This is a good slide to just illustrate that. It says that, when you make a one-time $3,000 credit card payment, if you are paying an 18% interest rate, and it would take you 10 years to pay off that debt. And over that 10 years, you're going to add an additional $2,000 of interest. Why do I talk about this? Because if this is something that you're doing, that $2,000 extra is money that you could be investing, but you're not because it's going to a credit card company. So why do I start with debt? Because there are so many places that debt is robbing us from having the ability to invest for our futures that it has to be addressed. So when you thought you were buying that $3,000 item, you actually spent more than $5,000 for it. Can you start to see how those pieces start to miss each other when somebody's trying to build financial security, but they keep making decisions that cost them $2,000 more than they intended to spend? And most of the time, people aren't aware of that. Another thing that's important is understanding the kind of debt that you have. There are two different types of debt. Some is called revolving debt. These are things like credit cards or variable rated interest rates or things of that nature. Some student loans could fall into this area. Some mortgages, when we call them HELOCs and different things, could fall into this category as well. And the difference is, take a look at this slide. It says $17,000 borrowed at an 18% interest rate, paying back $595 a month. You're going to pay over 17 years $12,500 of interest. That again, where could that go if you weren't paying on a revolving debt? That $12,500 could go into your savings accounts, into your debt freedom portfolio, into your retirement or your college planning so that you could ultimately leave it for your estate in the future. Because a fixed debt, you can have the same $17,000, the same 18% interest rate, the same $595 a month payment. You can have all of it the same, but simply because the debt is fixed, meaning the interest is already calculated in the process, you can literally have that same debt paid off, as you can see on the slide there, 3 years and 2 months versus 17 years and 2 months. Right? So now all of a sudden you're only paying $5,370 of interest. Now listen, the goal would be to pay no interest. But if you had the choice between $5,000 and $12,000, which is going to help you achieve your financial goals just a little bit quicker and allow you to get out of debt faster? So understanding your debt and potentially repositioning that debt is a critical piece to building financial security and wealth as well. On this last concept of debt stacking, I just want to show you a strategy. And this is exactly what Dwayne was talking about earlier, about being able to guarantee that rate of return and being able to guarantee an investment, which is paying off the debt. So if you were in this situation, looking at your slide where you had a store credit card, you had 2 credit cards, a car loan, and a mortgage, right? That's a pretty average situation for a family carrying debt, which is sad to think about, but that's about what I see on a daily basis. Total debts, you can see all the payments there. Total debts are totaling $2,700 a month. Right? If you can figure out what we call a debt stacking plan, where you just line up your debts based on interest rates and which need to get paid off quicker or first, and then what you do is, as you pay down this debt, don't put that $220 back into another area of your personal finance. Continue to pay $2,720 every month on your debt, but you're going to move the $220 once you've got your first card paid off. You're going to move that, add it to the $353 of the next card that's in line. So now you're paying that card at a rate of $573 while still making the minimums on everything you see underneath. Then once that card is eliminated, you take that $573, you add it to the $551 car payment, and now every month your car payment is getting paid by $1,100 a month. Now that thing is getting really paid off very quickly. Then once that's done, you take that full $1,100, you add it to the $303 of your next item, and you just keep doing that, where you can see along the bottom here that $2,700 remains the same number. But now what you're doing is you're purposefully paying down that debt quickly, right? You can add that mortgage payment in here. Orville talked about the ability of, in a couple of weeks, you guys are going to learn how to pay off your mortgages in 5 to 7 years. This is in alignment with that exact strategy, being able to go through those pieces. If you can execute a debt strategy like this, a debt stacking process, literally somebody could spend 23 years in debt, when in reality, the same exact money should only keep them in debt for 9. That's 14 years. 14 years sooner of getting out of bondage, 14 years sooner avoiding $130,000 of interest that could be going into your investment portfolio. So again, why do I start with debt? Because every $130,000 matters. And we need to get to a place where that $130,000 is working for you, not against you. And it's these concepts that help us do that when I sit across the kitchen table and help clients achieve those goals. Because that $2,700 is the same regardless of how you pay your bills. So it's all about changing your disciplines and your habits and how you approach it. So now we're going to get into the investing piece. I promised I wouldn't live there for too long, but it was critical that we talked about the debt piece and got that out of the way and understood that that is the first step of getting yourself to a place where you can comfortably and responsibly start to invest. So now that you're paying yourself first, let's take a look at this. I had said earlier, one of the myths was that, the average person says, oh, well, I don't make enough money. Well, let's kind of dispel that rumor or that myth real quick, because over a 40-year career, if you just made $30,000 a year on average for 40 years, that means that you're going to have $1.2 million of lifetime earnings. If you make $40,000 a year, you can see 1.6. If you make $50,000 a year or average that, you're over $2 million of earnings that you've had just as one individual. If you get married and you're lucky enough to be blessed in that department, you can see that that's two incomes moving that needle. And now all of a sudden you're talking about 2.4 million or 3.2 million or $4 million. And so I start here because most people need to understand that their income that they make is sufficient. What's insufficient are habits, disciplines, and plans. So we make enough to make a difference. We just have to know how to do that. So it's not what you make, it's what you save. So here's a fun little calculation of if you want to figure out where you're at or where you should be, figure out what your average annual income is. In this example, we'll say $30,000. So if you've been working, let's just give 18 to 22 to college. So let's just say you've been working from 23 on. So you've had 5 years of working life. You're 28 years old and you've been earning $30,000 a year. That would be $150,000 of earnings, $6,000 of money saved. That would mean that you've only saved around 4% of what you've earned. So you can kind of see how this math works. You just simply take your average annual income times the number of years you worked. That's going to equal the total amount there in column C, amount of personal savings, and then you divide your column D by column E, or by column C, and that'll give you the answer to your column E. That would sound like a little bit of a tongue twister, but hopefully this will give you, I'll leave this up here for just a second longer while you look it out and take some notes and see, where is it that you stand? It's important to identify where you are today so that you can make adjustments to move forward and not make the same disciplines and mistakes as you are right now. So where do we start? It's really here, the 3 accounts that you're going to need. Right? To have a complete savings program, most people need 3 types of basic accounts. One of them is an emergency fund, right? This is going to be the type of fund that's going to be money that you need in 1 year or less, right? You want little to no risk in this account. This type of an account is something where you're saving for your 3 to 6 month emergency account just to replace expenses if something happens. Then you want to have a short-term savings account. This is something that's in between that 1 to 5, 1 to 7 year time frame. Maybe it's a vacation. Maybe it's a car. Maybe it's, a down payment on a house. Maybe it's just a different thing that you're working to save towards. It's not quite in the emergency fund department. It should be in your short-term savings department. And then the last one is going to be your long-term savings and investing account. If you don't have 3 accounts, then you're already setting yourself up to fail. The reason why these are important is because each one protects the next. Right? If you have an emergency account, you don't have to go into your short-term savings. If you have a short-term savings and something really big happens, you don't have to go into your long-term retirement accounts and take money and then get taxed on that money that you take and penalized for it. And so all of these things matter. And so make sure that you have these 3 types of accounts. And earlier we had talked about investment risk. And here's where that conversation comes into play. Because the reality is that your emergency fund should not be invested the same way that your long-term retirement strategy is invested. Far too many people don't understand the concept between what it is we're trying to save for the short term and how that investment portfolio should look, and what we should be saving for the long term and how that investment portfolio should look. And we're going to dig in a little bit at that as well. So just getting a little bit more drilling down into what these accounts are. Your emergency account, the goal is to have up to 3 months of income. If you have $3,000 of income coming into your household, your goal should be to have an emergency account of $9,000. We've learned now, and I've had so many clients who are grateful that we've sat down and built them a strategy to have an emergency account when COVID happened, because people were laid off of work and people haven't been able to return to work, and they have money to lean back on. And that's because of this emergency account. It should be made for emergencies, for uncovered medical expenses, for major car repairs, for things that normally put the average person in debt. Because what happens when you have a car problem and then you have no money saved? Guess what you got to do? You have to pull out your credit card. And guess what happens when you've got to put 4 new tires on a car? That's $600. And before you know it, you've got $1,000 on a Visa card and you're back in the debt game. The emergency account is critical because once you get out of debt, it is what keeps you out of debt. right? The next account would be your short-term account. Again, this is up to 6 months of income. So your emergency account should be 90 days. Your short-term account should be at least 6 months of income in case you lose a job. It's to reserve for unforeseen events like, hello, has anybody heard of COVID-19, right? Disabilities or short-term purchases, cars or down payments on homes, things of that nature. And then that last one is that wealth building account. These are going to be your retirement funds or your college savings accounts for your children. These are going to be your Roth or traditional IRAs, your 401ks, your 403bs, your deferred compensation plans, all of the different opportunities, your tax sheltered accounts, maybe some annuities. Those are going to be your wealth building accounts. Right. And so a lot of people say, so where do I get started, David? And so I say, look, let's just say we based on a $200 total investment. Let's just say that's all you had available to you on a monthly basis. What it should look like is you should be establishing a minimum of 50% of that $200 you should be putting away in your emergency fund on a monthly basis to achieve that goal. You should be putting another 25% into your short term to continue building that as well. And the last 25%, possibly putting that in your wealth building account if your other pieces of your financial strategy are already in play. So when you're trying to figure out, well, how do I save? Where do I save? How much should I save? Again, these are good rules of thumb to be able to apply to your personal financial situation. Being able to go in and make sure that you're funding these things is critical. So where do you invest? Right? If you have an emergency fund, you should have your investments in a 100% money market fund. That should be a place where that sits because you don't want to take any risk on money that you may need next month. If the market is down next month and you need that money, you don't want that money to go down with the market. So you want to be invested into something like a money market fund, a short-term fund like a conservative allocation fund. Right? We're going to get into some of what those mutual funds are and how they work, but understanding that it needs to be conservative in nature is critical on short-term money. Because a conservative fund is built to withstand some of the market downturn when those things happen. And let me be very clear, it's not if, it's when the market corrects, right? And so it's never about trying to beat the market. It's just about understanding how the market runs and then setting yourself up with the right types of investments. Wealth building concepts, it looks like this. Between now and when you retire, you're in your growth year. So maybe you should consider using growth funds. Right? They're going to be designed differently than the emergency funds. They're going to be designed differently than what you would use for short-term funds. They're going to be designed for longer-term growth. They're going to trail the market and do what the market does. They're going to follow closely with it, right? And then when you get to retirement, now you're going to reposition those assets into something that we call an income type of a fund or into a balanced fund. Again, these funds are designed, they're all types of mutual funds to invest into. Here's where so many people get in trouble. They're having their emergency fund account invested into growth mutual funds. That's not a match. Growth mutual funds are for long-term retirement strategy funds. Income funds are designed for when you need income from your investments. And so they're designed to be less aggressive and more secure when the market is adjusting. And so understanding those differences is critical when it comes to those investing processes. And so I've kind of already handled those definitions here on this wealth building concepts of the difference between what a growth fund is and an income fund and a balanced fund. On the screen, you can see what they are. An income fund invests in corporate and government municipal debt securities like bonds. They're designed for investors who desire periodic income payments. Those are for folks who are in retirement right now and want that money to come in and be consistent, right? The balance fund is going to give you a little bit of both. It's some growth and it's some income, right? Because you want to keep growing for the future as well. And so again, I want to be very clear. Your situation depends as to which one of these makes the most sense for you. There is no right or wrong answer to say everyone should be in A or everyone should be in B. It really does depend on your specific situation. One of the things that I talk about as well is helping families understand this is that bank conversation. Become an owner, not a loaner. I tell my clients all the time, if you take 10 grand into the bank, what do you think they do with that money? Most of these banks own all of the investment vehicles that we use as Middle America, right? And so they just take it in the front door and turn it around and repurpose it. They either give it to you in the form of a loan through a credit card or through a student loan or through a mortgage, or they invest it themselves. And so they take your money right into the front door. And what I try to teach folks is to say, hey, look, instead of allowing them to do that, you bypass the middleman and go do that for yourself. Like, this is money that you've earned. This is money that you've worked for. This is money that you and your family have sacrificed for. This is money that the Lord has blessed you with, right? And so instead of letting the bank control what happens, taking control of yourself or for yourself is critical. Take a look at this. And I talk about this all the time because people always ask me, David, what about market risk? I'm so afraid of the market. And I always ask them, were you aware that you're taking a risk even sitting your money at your house in the safe? Were you aware that you were even taking a risk simply by just leaving your money sitting in the bank? And they're like, well, what are you talking about? And I say, well, look, if you have a $10,000 investment that's getting 1% at your local bank, let's just take a look at how that works. Your interest for the year is $100. From there, you're going to pay $25 in taxes. So you got to take $25 out of the 100. So now here your net earnings are $75. Your resulting balance would be $10,000 because that's your initial principal plus the $75 that you've now earned. But what nobody thinks about is this next line, inflation. See, inflation is at a 3% clip, and now your buying power has been reduced. So many folks don't consider the word inflation when it comes to their money. See, and the good way to think about this is, they make those little books where it says, if you were born in such and such year, and you can open it and see a list of all the things you could buy, right? The cost of a house when I was born in 1977 is way, way less than the cost of a house this year. That's inflation. The cost of a stamp, of a gallon of milk, of a loaf of bread just 5 years ago, all of it more expensive. That's inflation. So if you just leave your money in the bank and you're only getting 1%, you get taxed at a 25% rate, and inflation is growing at 3%, you have now lost money by guaranteeing protection at the bank. And so that's where I start talking about, should everybody invest? I don't know. I don't know what your situation is, and it's hard to answer that question. But understand, not investing has risks. Like, the market does have risks, and there's no denying that. But so does leaving your money out of the market. And so we need to understand that. One concept when it comes to investing that you should understand is rate of return, and understanding how does that impact your money, right? Do you know the rule of 72? This is one of the most basic, fundamental things that you can learn. Basically what it is fundamental math. It's the rule of 72. You take the number your money is receiving as an interest or a rate of return, and you divide it into the number 72. Pretty simple math. So in this example, we're going to use 3%, 6%, and 12%. So if you take the number 3, I'm going to give my friend Dwayne, who's sitting over next to me, I don't think you guys can see him, but I'm going to give him the 3% bucket of money. And I'm going to go ahead and take the 6% bucket of money, and we'll let Orville take the 12% bucket of money. We're going to see what the time frame does by understanding the rule of 72. So if you take the number 3, you divide it into 72, 3 goes into 72 24 times, which means it's going to take Dwayne's bucket of money 24 years to double in value. My money, it's going to take 12 because 6 goes into 72 12 times. And then Dwayne's 12 goes into 72 6 times. Or, I'm sorry, Orville's, right? And so now looking at this time frame, what we're looking at is a huge difference. Same discipline, same starting point. We each had $10,000. We each waited 48 years to utilize our resources. Dwayne's bucket of money, I'm sorry, Dwayne, is only worth $40,000. He'll be calling Orville, whose money is now worth $2.5 million. Same money, same time, same discipline, same effort. The vehicle that you choose for your money matters. If nobody's ever heard the rule of 72, then nobody can apply the rule of 72. If nobody can apply the rule of 72, that's why only 1 out of 100 people have $1 million saved. Because not enough people get this message. Not enough people understand how to apply it and take advantage of it. Right? Your interest on your money matters. Some people think if you can just double your interest rate, well, I'm getting 4.5%. So if I can get 9%, that means my 100,000 should be 200,000. It couldn't be further from the truth. Because of compound interest, doubling your interest rate quadruples your savings. It doesn't double it, it quadruples it, because it compounds and compounds in itself over and over and over again. It is such a critical piece of the puzzle when it's coming to the process of saving money. You can't just save, you have to invest. There are vehicles designed to help you invest your dollars to allow your money to work harder for you than you did for it. Just taking a look at the U.S. inflation over the last, 40 years, U.S. inflation has been 2.5%. So $10,000 needed to grow by at least $11,000 for a total of $21,000, or you've lost money. The S&P 500 has gotten around 10%, a little over 10%. $200,000, that same 10 grand should have netted you, but didn't if you weren't invested into the S&P 500, which is stocks. And we're going to get into that and how they work inside mutual funds. Use time and consistency. This is critical. Young folks who are on the video tonight listening, pay attention to this. You have to start saving sooner than later. The sooner you start, the cheaper it is, and the cheaper it will always be for you, because when you start in the beginning, what you need to save on a monthly basis can stay small. And I'll show you what I mean by that here in just a second. If you were to put a $1,000 investment and get a 9% rate of return when you were, born, if your parents would have done that for you, that money would have grown to over $400,000 by the time you were 65 years old. A one-time $1,000 investment at 9% growth, right? If you do it at age 16, look at the difference in those numbers, 400 to 96. That 16-year window that was missed went from $400,000 of value to $96,000 of value. And if you wait until you're 40 to do that, now you've only been able to manage to turn that $1,000 into $11,000. So the time consistency on your side is making sure that you're doing that on a timely manner and doing it as soon as possible. Don't pay the high cost of waiting. If your goal is to save $500,000 for retirement, look at the difference time makes. If you begin that process at age 25, you only have to save $89 a month. If you wait until you're 35, just waiting 10 years, that number jumps from $89 to $224. More than 2 times. At age 45, it's $602. At age 55, $1,900. Most people, I don't get to see them until they're in their 40s. Now, I don't want this slide to discourage you and say, well, David, that's me. I'm in my 40s and I'm not saving yet. I don't want you to be discouraged by this slide. What I want you to do is understand we don't have the time to wait, right? You have to work on this plan. You've got to get out of debt. It's critical to be able to do that so that you can get to the savings process. I don't want to beat this point up, so I'm just going to skip this next slide for the sake of time. It's essentially saying the same thing, investing $100 a month at 9%, and just the difference growth that you see on the screen there between ages 25 and 26. I will point out that one line. It's funny that just that 1 year from age 25 to age 26, look over the cost to wait, $49,000. Do the math. $100 a month times 12 is $1,200. So waiting 1 year and saving $1,200 made a $49,000 difference long term. Compound interest, folks, that is what is critical when it comes to your savings. This last little slide, as we talk about the time value of money, understanding an investor who starts saving money at age 22 could stop saving money at age 29 and never save another dollar. They could save $5,000 a year from 22 to 29, never save any more money. $40,000 of their money would grow to $1.8 million. For the investor that says, hey, I was worried about PlayStation 5s and rims for my car and a nice sound system, I'm not knocking any of those things. Those things are great to have and fun to have if you can afford to have it. But that person didn't invest because he was using that money for those things, right? And now all of a sudden, that person might be me, by the way. I could be telling a story about my own life. But now here we are at 30 years old, starting to invest $5,000 a year that has to be done every year to age 67. Now, look, going through that process is $190,000 of money, and it still grows to $1.7 million. But look, 1.7 is great. But the reality is doing it early would have only cost you $40,000 to get to $1.8 million. Waiting now means you have to put $190,000 to get to 1.7. And at the end of the day, whether it's 1.8 or 1.7 really doesn't matter because you're getting in the right space. But hopefully you're getting the point of starting sooner than later is important, and it's critical to your long-term success. So where should you invest? Here we're going to get into mutual funds and what they are and how they work. Right? For the longest time, we used to talk to people about the ability of what we called the 3-legged stool approach on how you should fund retirement with things like Social Security, company pensions, and personal savings. But Social Security isn't so secure these days, is it? We're hearing in the news that that's going to be a problem probably for some of us. Company pensions, how many of us have those? Are they available anymore? It's getting to a point where our retirement savings is ever more being put on our shoulders. And if you're not taking the steps that you need to take to get your retirement squared away, there might not be money left for you by the time you get to retirement. And so what you want to take advantage of are what we call the 3 Ds of investing, right? Really simple. Dollar cost averaging is number 1. I'm going to give you an example of that here in just a minute. Discipline, doing it every single month. Diversification, not putting it all in one place. Right? We don't want our money sitting in one spot. So what does dollar cost averaging look like? And here's that part. We're going to talk about market risk as well in this conversation. Systematic investing allows you to use what we call dollar cost averaging. So if you had the choice of being investor A or investor B, I'll tell you a little story. Investor A is investing $100 a month in a rising market. So in month 1, stocks are worth $12, right? In month 2, they go up to 14. In month 3, they're 16. In month 5, 6, it keeps rising, right? So when we're looking at that price point, every person out here would probably say, yeah, I want to be investor A, because look at investor B. They started at 12, went down to 6, and back up to 12. I'm sorry, the number should be 10. Those graphs are a little off. I apologize for that. But looking at the math of it, if we're looking at the adjustable market, the fluctuating market, that's where value is built. So many people think a bad market is not a good thing. Look, Walmart is not going out of business simply because the market is bad. It just means their stock price is on sale. And so if you want to participate in buying Walmart stock when it's lower, you want to buy it in an adjusted market that is going down, right? It's not to say that you shouldn't buy it when it's going up. I'm just simply saying you buy value and build wealth in the adjusting markets. So the investor B, who saw his money, as soon as he put it in, go down, and then it went right back up to where he started. He never got beyond where it started, but he ends up with 126 shares of his investment stock. Investor A was only able to buy 42 shares because that price just kept getting more expensive and more expensive and more expensive. And so he was able to buy less and less and less. And so if you do the math, literally $42 times 20, do the math on that. It's around $800. But if you had 126 shares of stock, even though it only got back to that $10 price point, 126 times 10 is $1,200. So who had more money at the end? The investor B with $1,200. So it's important to understand that bad markets are our friends. We can't run from them. We can't sell in bad markets in all cases. Some cases it may need to make sense, and I want to be clear on that. Every situation is different, but I need you to understand the opportunity of dollar cost averaging. Right? Knowing that as the market adjusts and even when it gets lower, you're buying stock at lower price points. So when we're going through that process, that is a critical piece of this process. So what is a mutual fund? Mutual fund is an opportunity for you to invest with other investors, because if we called a company and said, hey, we have $25 we want to invest, is Apple taking our phone call for that investment? No. But if we pool our assets together with other investments and we now call and put it out into the global economy, what happens is now Apple would take our phone call. But we want to diversify so you can see all of the different opportunities that are here, investing with Verizon or McDonald's or Microsoft or Disney or all the companies that you see on the slide. When you share a mutual fund, you're mutually spreading that money and mutually benefiting from those profits. Those profits come back to the professional money management team who return that profit to the investors. That's how we get rates of return inside of our investment vehicles. And so when we talk about those things, that's critical. A mutual fund, and there are all kinds of them. And so we'll get to a point where we can answer some questions here shortly about what kind of mutual funds are available. But the power of deferred tax savings is also something that's critical. You've got to understand how to take advantage and the difference between deductibilities and deferrabilities. A deduction is something that you can subtract from your gross income, like a traditional IRA. If you invest a certain amount of money and you don't make your income level, you don't cut there are income levels that you have to meet inside of a traditional IRA. As long as you're under that threshold, you can deduct some of that money and not have to pay taxes on that money and allow that money to then grow instead. Right? A deferral means that you're pushing when you pay taxes on that money down the line a little bit. And so there's a difference between those two things. Deductible is now, deferral is later, right? And so which IRA should you be investing in? Should you have a traditional IRA where you deduct that opportunity? Should you have a traditional IRA where it's a non-deductible opportunity? Should you have a Roth IRA where it's not deductible now, but you also aren't taxed later? Right? They're all different opportunities, and you have to understand what they look like and how they may service you. But these are some of the critical ones that you should be aware of. Traditional IRAs, Roth IRAs, 401ks is another one. That's going to be a company-sponsored program that you should be looking into that potentially helps you save more money because your company is going to be matching. And we can get into some of those during the Q&A section as to how all of that works. So a Roth IRA, the benefit obviously is that you can't deduct those taxes now, but you get that money, you get to defer the growth on that money, and you get to pull that money out as long as you meet all the qualifications of the Roth. You get to pull that money out tax-free at retirement. So for those of you who want to avoid paying taxes in retirement, a Roth IRA may be something that you want to look into because you won't owe those taxes. Right? You've got contribution limits in 2020 of $6,000 in each the Roth and the traditionals. If you're over 50, you can invest around $7,000. And so the earnings are both tax deferred. Your retirement withdrawals, one in the traditional is going to be taxable. The one in the Roth, again, is going to be tax free. There are distribution requirements in a traditional IRA that makes you take that money out at 70 and a half. That's simply because the government's saying, hey, you still haven't paid taxes on this money, and now we want to get our money. Whereas in the Roth, you can see there are no age requirements in that situation. I didn't intend for this slide to pop up. This one was really the last piece of what we wanted to talk about. And so I know we've covered a lot of ground, and I want to give time to really get into that question and answer session, because I know I'm a couple minutes beyond what my out time was, but we had a lot of information to cover, wanted to get into mutual funds, wanted to cover the critical pieces of what it should look like. And so now, Dwayne, if you want to come back into this conversation and really just elaborate or ask some questions, or just kind of throw back to me, what are some things that maybe you've seen on the chat board or coming through, or some things that we can help some of these folks answer?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I just want to say thanks, David. I mean, that's some incredible information. There's a lot of information there that people may not be aware of, and I highly recommend that you go back and watch this video again, because there was a lot to take in. But we do want to answer some questions here. One of the first questions that comes up that says, for those who don't have investment experience, what do you suggest, particularly now when the market is down and maybe for some time? I know you kind of covered that a little bit there, but can you talk a little bit, because a lot of times we hear down markets, and you kind of indicated that a down market is actually a great time to invest. So can you just kind of summarize that a little bit more and kind of answer that question regarding that?
Yeah, I'd love to, Dwayne. Really, the opportunity when the market is down is so many investors are fearful of investing in a down market. And really what I try to put it into another category sometimes, and I say, look, if you were going to go buy a house, would you want the housing market to be like really, really good, so you had to pay $300,000 for a house? Or would you want it to maybe be in a depressed market where you could go get that same house for $200,000? What do you think most people say when I ask them that question?
Yeah, I mean, they definitely go for the house when it's on sale.
Yeah, it's on sale, right? If we go to a car dealership and the same car that we want, one's 30, one's 20, everything is exactly the same. Which one are we going to be more apt to buy?
Definitely the 20.
Yeah. Only in investing do we have the conversation of going, oh, the market's down, it's on sale, we shouldn't buy, right? And so I use that as a simple analogy. And again, situations are different. So to answer that specific question, if you have a debt strategy plan and you're paying down your debt, if you are feeding yourself and paying all of your bills, and you have excess money that you are able to use, then investing in a down market, there are opportunities there that you should take advantage of. I can't say like what's the best approach. Mutual funds are going to be a really solid approach, and there's some that are different, but that's going to impact, if you're in your mid 20s, I'd say a great opportunity might be in growth mutual funds. But if that question is coming from somebody who's 55 and getting ready to retire, then that's a different conversation that we may need to say something more along the lines of an income fund or something to that degree. But again, it's going to be situational, but that's where I would start, is to look in the mutual fund marketplace and figure out, again, have somebody to walk you through that and help answer your specific questions so that they can guide you better.
And that's why it's so important to work with a professional, someone that actually knows and understands how these things work. David alluded in the slides and showed us the difference between investing in the wrong areas and how much it can cost you over the course of a lifetime. So it's definitely worth it to sit down and talk with someone to help you with that strategy. And David is definitely someone that can help you with that. Another question that comes in that says, how much should we have saved for retirement? I know this is kind of it varies for everybody, but can you just kind of give a general answer to that question?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Really, it's what it boils down to is how much should you have saved? You really have to take a look at your lifestyle. When you're planning, it's better to look at things in percentages, right? So if you're planning and you're in the retirement phase, you should be planning on looking at your income now. And let's say you're making, I don't know, $100,000 a year between your spouse unit, right? The husband and the wife together are making $100,000. How much of that should you be planning to live on in retirement is the first question. So typically you want to plan on living on about 70 to 80% of what you need now, because the goal would be you're out of debt, right? You don't have those expenses of debt, so you shouldn't need 100% of your income. If you have a sound financial program, you should only need about 70, 80 tops. So first, it's figuring out that math. Out of $100,000, you need to make sure you account for $70,000 of income. And then you need to factor in some inflation. So it is a little bit of a difficult math problem to kind of think of in your head. But the reality is you want to think of 70% of your current income. And then in your mind, just start to go, okay, how many years do I need this money to last? Because that's ultimately the question that you're asking me. Some people retire at 65, some retire at 72. Again, this is a very personal personal situational scenario. So you've got to answer some questions for yourself first and then just back into the math. A good rule of thumb is to say it should be $1 million and then go from there.
Everyone's different. I mean, $1 million looks differently from one person to another. And another thing that people may not take into account is what are the costs of things going to be. And I mean, if you're in your 20s now, imagine what the cost of things may be when you retire. So it's important to put a plan in place so that way you can reach your goals. Another question that says here, there are many things we don't know or our parents didn't know that adversely affects us. I can definitely attest to that. What age should our children start saving, and how, if they're taking out loans in college? I know that's a huge issue right now with student loans and getting caught up and being able to save with student loans. How would you approach that?
Well, I can only tell you how I've approached it in my family. When I was a child, I came from a background where I was in a single mother household, and my father died when I was young, and my stepfather had some other stuff going on and some issues, and so our family unit was broken, and so I watched firsthand what not having enough money did to a family unit. And so that's why I built this business. It was to be able to help educate and help families kind of right that ship. Specifically, to speak to the question, the reason why I gave a little bit of backstory is because as soon as my wife and I, as soon as the Lord blessed us with our first child, we immediately open savings accounts for her in her name. And the reason being is I shared in that presentation one of the slides where it says, hey, a one-time investment of $1,000 when you were born grows to $400,000 by the time they're 67. That's the impact that starting early makes. And so the answer to your first question of how soon should my children start saving money, I would say as soon as you can possibly afford to help get them set up on the right foot. And I say that also with this caveat. You have to help yourself first. So if you're not there yet with yourself, as much as it sounds good to do it for your children, you've got to be able to do it for you first so that you can set them up for success. But I would start immediately. I think the second part of that question was about, what was that? How do they start saving if they're taking out loans in college? That's a difficult one. We go back to the idea that debt is stealing from wealth. Right. And so if you're putting yourself in a position where you're already taking debt out to pay for college, and I realize that there are situations where you're like, well, I have no other option. So what I tell folks when I sit with them is to say, look, if you are going to college for a specific career, let's say to be a teacher, and you know that a teacher makes, I don't know, $50,000 a year. And forgive me, teachers, I don't know if that's a real number. Hopefully I gave you a raise in that number. I'm not sure what it is, but let's say it's 50. The rule of thumb is you shouldn't take more debt over, if you multiply that $50,000 out by 10 years, that cost to you shouldn't be more than 10% of what that salary is times 10. So in other words, if you're going to school and you know that the career you're going to be in is only going to pay you $30,000, you shouldn't be coming out of college with $100,000 of student loan debt, because those two numbers don't match. And I hope that that little equation gives you a little bit of hope, but it's hard to answer that question because funding college is a difficult thing if you haven't saved.
Yeah, and that's a huge thing. There are many people out there that go to school and they get these degrees in careers that don't really justify the amount that they're paying in school loans. So it's really important to kind of put that plan in place. Listen, we love teachers and we love people that go into those fields where they're not necessarily the highest paying fields, but you have to be prudent getting into it on the front end. Here's another good question. All right, what's a good source to find a financial advisor? I can answer this one for you, actually. David is a great person that you can talk to, and I'm going to throw a little plug in here as well too. David is to talk to David and to get some information from David and get a plan started. It is absolutely free. I'll just say that again. It is absolutely free. There's no cost up front for you to sit down and talk with David to get a plan in place. I promise you it's one of the best things you can do, because he's going to be able to get your mindset in the right place, put the plan in place, and then hopefully, definitely actually help you achieve those goals. But once again, it is absolutely free to talk with David and to be able to put that plan in place. All right, let's go to the next one that says, all right, I understand we need credit card to help build our credit. So should we only use a credit card for necessary times like a washer and pay it off in 30 days? And use cash, not credit card, or for non-necessities, so we'll spend less? This is a credit card question, which is tied into debt. What are your thoughts on that?
I think so. it's kind of one of these things where we as a country, we as a society are so into this idea of we want it now, we want it shiny, we want it new, right? There was a question about, hey, what are some things that our parents maybe didn't teach us that we should have? Well, I'll tell you one thing that our parents did teach me, and our parents, I think, knowing your mom as well, too, Dwayne, just that they did teach us, look, our parents didn't run out and buy something brand new just because they needed it. They worked with what they had until they could save and buy what they needed with cash. And so it's kind of a two-part question here. It's understanding the difference between need and want. And then it's also understanding how far can you push that need back. I mean, look, if you're in a situation where you have no other option and all you have is a credit card, as unfortunate as it might be, that might be your only play. And I would still encourage you to try to avoid that at all costs. But at the end of the day, cash is always going to be king because you're not going to pay any extra money towards debt. You're not going to be, or towards interest, excuse me, and you're going to own it immediately. And if you need to sell it again, you could and recoup that cost that you spent and maybe making a little bit back. So I would always say, find a way to strategize. Cash is king. Buy cash. Avoid the credit cards at all costs.
Yeah, definitely for an absolute emergency situation. If you can have, and like you mentioned earlier, having that three-pronged approach, having those emergency fund, short-term fund, you're less likely to use a credit card if you have money in those accounts.
Yeah, and that's critical. That's why that emergency fund is such an important first step. It's why you start there once you have that debt handled, because if the washer does go out and you've got 3 kids at home that you need to make sure have clean clothes, I understand that scenario. If you have an emergency account established, then you get to buy it with cash.
Right. And then you can pay yourself back in that account without interest, right?
Yeah, correct.
All right. Another question says here, what are some of the best stocks to invest in? And I know you talked a little bit about mutual funds, and there are many people out there that kind of play in the stock market game and talk about the best stocks to invest in. I'm pretty sure you're not going to give the best stocks to invest in, because that's such that can take us down such a rabbit hole that we will never get out of. But can you lend a little bit on what's the approach or the strategy that you would use?
Yeah, I think there's always, it's like anything else. When you're buying a stock or an equity or something, you're really looking to be able to find where is their value, right? In other words, you're not going to buy something at its highest point of value just to kind of get in on that specific stock, right? I won't say any specific stock names or any company names at all, because I don't want to sway any person in any direction. Really, the thing to think about when it's coming to stocks is you have to identify what is your purpose. What do you want that stock for? What are you trying to achieve with it? Is it about generating revenues right now? Is it about creating dividends so that you have money coming in? Is it about reinvesting so that you can then go, okay, hey, we want this to compound and reinvest dividends over a long period of time? So there's a number of different things you've got to ask yourself to understand the answer to that question. There is no best stock to invest in. It's all tied to what are the expectations? What are you trying to achieve with that stock? And what is the purpose of the money that you're investing in that stock? Because there's also, as you're going to learn maybe next week, they may get into this, there's tax situations that you've got to be aware of when you're buying and selling stock and all of that stuff and the type of account you're buying it in. And so it's not always just the best idea to just go buy a stock just because you're like, hey, I want to own XYZ, right?
Yeah, and that's important to understand that for the average person, for the most average investor out there, it's definitely good to diversify. And in many cases, when you're just buying a stock, you're tying in a certain amount of money to that stock and how that stock performs. So it's probably the riskiest proposition out of everything we've talked about today, just going in and investing in one particular stock. Another question that's come in, it says, is buying land or a house a good investment, and which is better to invest in? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first, I think that buying land or a house or both, I think it's great. I think any opportunity that you can have for ownership of something that is a limited resource, because without volcanoes erupting, there isn't much land that's going to be created that's new, right? And so buying land is a commodity that isn't necessarily that's out there for everybody. Again, this plays a position in somebody's portfolio, assuming they've got should you go into debt to buy a bunch of land because it's a good investment? No, you shouldn't, right? Unless there is a financial strategy that is sound for that position. Otherwise, it's probably not the best idea. But buying land and buying homes, I think, are fantastic. You can turn those opportunities into all types of wealth down the line. You can turn a home into a rental property. You can turn, land into this to a sale of a business who's going to build a building on there and pay you 3 or 4 times more than you bought it for because they like that location. And so do I think that they're good investments? I would absolutely say yes, they're good investments. I think they're perfect for diversifying an investment portfolio that already has a debt strategy that's working, that already has a retirement account that's established and working, that already has college savings if you have kids, that already has your emergency account. If you've got all of those boxes checked, I would say, yeah, why not? Let's diversify.
Yeah,
Let's have some new opportunities.
And it's important to know also that with things like land and a house, like you mentioned before, having those other foundations set. I heard someone once say, I don't speculate until I don't speculate with money that I know that I need. Right. So if you're getting into a speculative play, I'm not going to give up money that I need to buy that investment. It's got to be money where it's like, you know what, if I lose this entire amount, I'm okay with that because it's a speculative play. But when so that's why it's important to kind of get those other things set in place first. And if you have an overflow, if you have extra, then yeah, you can start getting into speculative opportunities. I see some people coming in saying, can we get David's contact information? There on the bottom of the screen, if you just text in your name and your information to 407-720-7445, 407-720-7445. We'll get David's contact information over to you. Once again, I'll say it again. It is absolutely free to talk to David. He has a wealth of knowledge. He's been doing this for a long time, and he's helped many, many, many people get out of debt, saving and investing for the future, and literally impacting lives. And David, I really appreciate you coming on and doing that. Do we have time for one more question? Okay, so we don't have time for any more questions, but David, I do want to kind of put a button on this, a bow on this, kind of wrap this up, and talk a little bit, once again about what people can expect when they talk with you, and kind of take us out.
Yep. Absolutely. So, and Dwayne is right. My contact information, if you'd like, is 407-595-7157. That's my personal cell phone number. Be respectful at the time you call or text. That's my only request. But what to expect when you call me is really just one of these. I want to be able to understand your situation intimately. And so what that's going to take is it's going to take a meeting, at least over the phone, or, obviously with COVID out there now, we'll probably do like a Zoom call or something to that effect, where we can actually just interview one another and just talk about what it is you're trying to achieve. What are your goals? Where are you and where do you want to go? And so those are the things that I really want to be able to help you understand is what is the next right step to take. And that's ultimately what you can expect from me, is to help you understand where you are, where you want to go, and what that next right step is. As a part of being on this program, every person who wants to call and sit down will be getting a free financial needs analysis. And that's yours to keep, just as a blessing from my business to you and your home, and just to be able to make an impact when it comes to your finances, to hopefully help build that roadmap to help you start moving those pieces along.
Thanks once again, David. I really appreciate you coming along. Listen, I will tell you this right now: no matter what your situation is, whether you think you're too far gone, or you're too old, or you're too young, whatever the case may be, I highly, highly recommend that you at least give David a call, get together a financial needs analysis, at least discover what your situation is, and put a plan in place. Listen, everything you do in life, if you want to be successful, you need a plan. And I can guarantee you that the decisions you make today will highly impact your situation tomorrow.
Thank you again. Thank you again. We want to thank David again for joining us. The great thing about it is that David has put his contact information on the screen, so you can be able to access that as well. You'll be able to access that information. Just look at the screen and be able to do that as well. So this is a great opportunity for each and every one of you. I'm sure each and every one of you enjoyed the information this evening. We're looking forward to you all contacting David and getting more information and making you better with investments. Looking forward for next week. Next week, we're going to have the estate planning piece of faith in finance. So this time we wanted to actually have the young lady that's going to be presenting next week. She's going to give you just a little bit of information about what to expect on next week. Her name is Joy Carmichael. So she joins us here live in studio just to prep us for what we expect to see from her on next week. Joy, what do we look forward to on next week when you join us for the full segment?
Well, Elder Thomas, I would ask the Patmos members and those who are watching, other guests, do you have your Plan Z in order? And I say that, although I'll be speaking on estate planning, I think of it as having a Plan Z. Many of us have a Plan A, the way in which we work and live. We may have a Plan B, just in case that job fails or something else, or we need to make some changes in life, we may have kind of a backup plan to keep our some sort of income. But when I say Plan Z, that's planning for the emergencies of life, things that happen, interruptions that we don't expect, sickness, long illnesses, sometimes death, even disabling situations such as a death. So I'll be talking about the ultimate, which people usually think of in estate planning, is having a will or establishing a trust. And what is the difference between a will and a trust? I'll talk about the durable power of attorney. And do we all need to have one? Is it used only in instances when someone is incapacitated? Can it be used in a limited way rather than giving someone full authority to handle all of your business transactions? I'll also talk about, as I just mentioned, that those events such as an illness or when we're incapacitated, and someone may need access to our medical care. There are various rules and regulations that limit family members from having access to your medical records and from making medical decisions for you. And if you don't have your written plan, written documents properly executed, then those who make those decisions aren't required to respect the opinions or the choices of your relatives. So those are the types of items I'll be talking about. And when people think of estate planning, they typically think about, oh, that's for maybe those with a large amount of wealth, and that's when they're transferring their wealth to their descendants. But the reality is, estate planning is for anyone who is basically alive and breathing from the point of age 18. I'll talk about how at every phase of life, from 18 and the building years to the years, the young families and establishment years, and settling down in retirement, senior years, why we need an estate plan and how we need to continue to review our estate plan to make proper changes. So that's what we'll be talking about. It's for everyone, and you'll receive a lot of legal information. After that, I do plan to have a short class for those who are interested. And if you're interested in actually establishing your estate plan, you can send your information to, I think they have information online. You can text your contact information to that number, and I can follow up with you as well.
All right, we sure appreciate that, Ms. Joy Carmichael. She's going to be here again live in studio next week with us and Dwayne as we tackle the subject of estate planning and inheritance as well. So we encourage each and every one of you to join us here on next Saturday evening, same time, 7:30. We'll go right up until 9 o'clock. If you enjoyed this series, then we want you to continue to join us as well. Just like Joy mentioned as well, we want everybody to take advantage of the wills, the trust, the estate planning as well. This is one area of the financial world, if you will, that is least participated in. And that shouldn't be the case, but we want to make sure we change that trajectory of where, especially we as a community, are not focused on. So we want to make sure each and every one of you actually email or text the number on the screen, your email address, because she wants to register you all into a free class to get set up to get you the information. And then if you want to go on and move through that information stage and actually following through with her, she's going to sit down with you even on a further basis to make that happen for you as well. So I encourage you to text your information to the number on screen, text your email address, or you can actually register and we'll send that out through our text blast through the church as well. Again, we want to thank each and every one of you for joining us here this Sabbath afternoon on the topic investments and saving. We hope you enjoyed our program, and we look forward to see you on next Saturday evening, same time, same place. On behalf of Dwayne, on behalf of Joy, and also on behalf of David, we thank you again. God bless you, and good night.